In this video, we're going to talk about seedless vascular plants. So let's talk about some general information about the seedless vascular plants. So first of all, the sporophyte. Remember, the sporophyte is the diploid generation in the alternation of generations. Now, when we talked about bryophytes, the gametophyte was the dominant generation, but in all other plants other than the bryophytes, the sporophyte is going to be the dominant generation. And by dominant, we mean more conspicuous, which just means it's more noticeable. With seedless vascular plants, water is still needed for reproduction, and that's because the male gamete has to be able to swim to the female gamete. As you can see, there are a couple of different phyla and classes that are associated with the seedless vascular plants. So the first one is phylum Lycophyta, which is primarily represented by these plants called club mosses. And then phylum Monilophyta consists of horsetails, whisk ferns, and true ferns. And we're going to talk about each of these in more detail on the following slides. So first, let's take a look at phylum Lycophyta. The Lycophyta are the earliest group of seedless vascular plants, and they are these small evergreen plants with leaves and microphyls. Remember, microphyls are small, and they only contain a single vascular vein. And these are also known as the club mosses. Sorry, I forgot to put that up here. And it's not to be confused with the true mosses, and I apologize that this picture is overlapping the wording. But the true mosses are the bryophytes that we talked about in the non-vascular seedless plants. Now we'll talk about phylum Monilophyta. There are three classes associated with this phylum. There are the horsetails, the whisk ferns, and the true ferns. So starting with the horsetails, first of all, if we look at the name, and I apologize that I don't know how to pronounce this, but Equisitopsida, we'll say, but think of equine equals horse. And so the name of the class goes along with the common name of a horsetail. These are typically located in damp environments and marshes. When I lived in Florida, the yard was basically just covered in these. They are everywhere in Florida. The stem has these joints or nodes to them, which you can kind of see in the picture here. And then these needle-shaped leaves and branches extend out as these whorls around that stem. And photosynthesis primarily occurs in the stem. So the leaves are very small and needle-like, so they don't have a lot of surface area for capturing the sun. They are also known for the silica that is in their cells. And these have been used before as kind of like brushes because of the structure or kind of the stiffness of those leaves. The horsetails have rhizomes, which are kind of like an underground stem that helps to anchor the plant in place. They are homosporous, which means that they make only one kind of spore. Now, one kind of neat thing about these plants is that their spores are attached to these eliders. And you can see them in this picture here. And this is actually a video that I can't play here, but I will post a link in the learning management system. And it shows you that these structures, they can kind of open and close based on humidity. And when the spore is released, they kind of help the spore to fly a little bit, to get a little bit further away from the parent plant. When the spores land in a favorable location, they produce gametophytes that are bisexual, meaning that one gametophyte has both male and female parts. The whisk ferns do not have roots or leaves, and it's believed that they at one point did have roots and leaves, and then kind of a de-evolution occurred that essentially took them away. Photosynthesis occurs in the stem, and you can see here that they have these sporangia kind of at the end of the stems here. And these sporangia contain the spores, and when the spores are released, they can germinate and then develop into small gametophytes. Now we're going to talk about the true ferns, and we're going to focus a little bit more on this particular class of the seedless vascular plants. So true ferns are the most advanced seedless plant. They can be found in tropical to temperate forest, but primarily in wet or moist environments. The stem may be above ground, forming a kind of trunk, or it can be buried, forming a rhizome. And then roots grow from the rhizome in order to absorb water and nutrients from the soil. In ferns, the sporophyte is the dominant stage. And remember, sporophyte is the diploid stage. So multicellular diploid. So these fronds you see here, these make up the sporophyte. The fronds are these large compound leaves that are both photosynthetic, and they also have the reproductive organs. And so these are those sporophyll leaves that we talked about in a previous video. One kind of neat thing about ferns is that they form these croziers, which are also known as fiddleheads, and you can see that here. And so this is a new frond that is developing, and it kind of unfurls as it develops more and more. And it's interesting because these are actually edible. When I lived in Alaska, during fiddlehead fern season, there are people that would go out and harvest the fiddleheads, and then they would actually cook them and serve them at restaurants, or you can make it at home as well. I never got a chance to try it, but I always thought it was interesting when restaurants would advertise that the fiddleheads were available. In another video, we're going to talk more about the sexual reproduction alternation of generations associated with the true ferns in more detail.